All right, welcome. My name is Matthias Holweg. I'm the American Standard Company's Professor of Operations Management, and I lead several of our AI programs. And it's my pleasure to be joined here by my colleague Michael. Michael, do you want to say a few words?
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Smets. I'm a professor of management here at Said Business School. I'm the module lead on the module on strategic leadership in the age of AI on our diploma. I contribute to various other AI programs with my capacity and research on leadership and especially transformation. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation here this afternoon in this webinar on leading transformation in the age of intelligent systems. And I think, Matthias, it was you who came up with the title and insisted that we don't just talk about AI, but we talk about intelligent systems. So how do the two
Yeah,
relate to each other?
no, I think, AI, obviously, everyone's talking about, and we generally look at it from a machine learning perspective as the algorithm, but I thought we should call it intelligent systems because increasingly we are putting AI systems to work, and especially in the age of agentic AI, we allow agents to interface with many other systems. So that is, to draw information from or submit information instructions to other systems, as well as, of course, interact increasingly with the physical world, right? So therefore, I do like the idea of embedded systems. We may not yet have robots that are, fully fluent in terms of interacting in our real world, but soon we will, and AI will play a major part in this. So in that sense, I thought would be good to go, a bit beyond.
Okay. And so is that where you think like the cutting edge is at the moment, or the kind of the next big thing?
Well, so the interest in AI, as everyone probably will know, comes in waves. Depending on which technology is hot and new, right? We've seen this with the advent of deep learning, and then of course we've seen this with the advent of LLMs or ChatGPT. That sort of made generative AI, very prominent in the debates. The most recent one, of course, is agentic AI, where essentially we take LLMs as the front end of an agent that we allow to essentially work on the next best action, and then allow it to execute it. So, you could ask it to book a holiday and it would consult with the calendar, maybe go through your photos and see, where you were happy, and probably wasn't the rainy hiking trip in Scotland, but more likely the nice beach trip to Mallorca. And then it would look at, your calendar, may also look at your bank account, and then it's rather Mallorca than Mauritius, and it may book it, right? So that clearly is hot. Reason for that, of course, is not so much the mundane travel booking, but that many repetitive business processes could be automated, right? So this is when Hinton talks about automating most of mundane intellectual work. Well, the way this would happen, or increasingly starts to happen, of course, is through agents. So that is very much hot, and the topic at the moment. Very interestingly, maybe just briefly on this, the Queen Elizabeth Awards for engineering were awarded just today. And Fei Fei Li actually was on the radio this morning talking about spatial intelligence as the next frontier. And I thought that was a very astute and interesting comment, not unsurprisingly, right, from a Stanford colleague. But of course, what she was saying was that so far AI agents are working in the digital world. If you want to connect them to the real world, what we would need to develop is spatial intelligence. And this term relates back to Gardner's old 7 types or 8, in his latest work, 9 types of intelligence, right? But clearly it's something that AI has not yet mastered. But if we wanted to bring AI, from the computer into the real world, that certainly is a big next step. So that certainly is hot. But we're in a business school, and not in a robotics lab. So maybe let me turn the question around to you. You obviously work a lot with professional service firms, and so I'm just curious to see where AI is hot in the space that you work in.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, yes, professional service firms, law, consulting, engineering. I mean, for years and decades, we've talked about the advent of the machine, and especially lawyers were going to be replaced. Richard Susskind has been arguing that for 20, 30 years by now. And now there seems to be more of that happening. And I've recently had the pleasure of reviewing a whole host of applications for a kind of legal innovation award. And what really struck me there was number one, that in professional service firms, this gets done a lot more in-house now. So bringing in data scientists and creating their own solutions. What I particularly liked there was this notion that it's not necessarily creating everything from scratch. Like you don't have to rebuild like the whole platform, but being much, much more selective about what are the out of the box solutions that we can buy and how can we then create something that is really competitive by using our own data, but also our own relationships. And I
Yeah.
thought the most cutting edge advisors there then used AI not just to deliver transactions more efficiently, but to build relationships more efficiently. Like, how do you tap into client systems? How do you really generate end to end solutions where you're no longer just providing the professional advice, if you will, but you become the data host and you, in a way, put yourself in a position where, as a trusted advisor, you understand the client better than the client understands themselves. And that, of course, creates incredibly high switching costs. And it really becomes a very powerful relationship building tool. Now, that's a radical shift in a sector that has previously very much relied on the kind of human touch and the kind of personal relationship that you buy. And I think that's a very, very fundamental shift that we're seeing there at the moment.
Yeah, no, but it also matches on to the development of the technological landscape, right? Underpinning it, where we essentially see, in essence, less than 10, maybe, what, certainly less than a dozen firms being able to build competitive large language models, right? Which then, of course, become the foundation upon which you would build those applications. And it's going to be an interesting development, I think, going forward, to what degree such professional service firms may opt to use existing commercially available large language models as the foundation upon which they build their tools, or to what degree they may opt to build small language models in-house, right? So much more focused, trained, and much more limiting in the sense, right? So not being able to do what Copilot can do for us, but being much more focally trained on specific data for specific tasks. So,
Yeah.
but
As you
of course,
mentioned,
I
sorry,
mean,
as you mentioned, the
yeah,
specific task. I mean, Laura just asked the question in the chat now, kind of what's left for the lawyers if AI does all of that? And I think that's a really fundamental question that is obviously of much concern to lawyers. But I think it really gets to the heart of how AI intelligence systems are going to transform the world of work, the future of work, and how we need to think in terms of tasks much more than in terms of roles. So it's not like lawyers are going to be obsolete, consultants are going to be obsolete, but certain tasks will become um, displaced, as in being done by machines rather than humans, which then means what is the entry level skill that we're asking those professionals to do? So, our dear colleague here at the school, Marisako, she prefers to talk about augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence, especially as it pertains to her research on the use of AI in the English legal profession. And the big shift there is basically no junior associate will ever again draft a new contract from scratch or use a template, but the first role where they get involved is the critical review. And that's again a very, very different skill set, a higher level of intellectual engagement where you're no longer the one who does the first draft and then somebody else reviews, but the machine does the drafting, and much earlier in your career, you are now becoming the one who does the reviewing. That should, of course, be reflected in the way that various professions, not just the law, are being taught at university and elsewhere.
yeah. And of course, that's also very much at the foundation of why studies that talk about the impact of AI on the future of work give us this broad range of estimates, right? I mean, Sumari, in fact, our colleague has this fantastic study where she benchmarked it from 9 to 90% of jobs that will be automated. And of course, what's underlying that is essentially is this misunderstanding that an occupation or a job does not equal a task, right? And that AI selectively will automate or augment tasks. I think what is fair to say is that pretty much all professional service firms context, people will have to work with AI. So this augmentation idea, I think, is certainly one that is very well established. While I would also question to what degree tasks can be automated, right? And in my space, I mean, the main automation of AIC is essentially mundane, repetitive back office processes that are very well specified, that do not require judgment, right? And I think the minute judgment comes in, we can talk about augmentation and to what degree AI can help. And maybe just one thing to add, because of course Jeff Hinton was always in the news with about the radiologist, story where he proclaimed that in 10 years' time, or 5 years' time, he initially said we will not have radiologists anymore, on the back of how well we can recognize images and therefore analyze X-rays and the like. He then, rephrased this as 10 years. And what, of course, has happened in practice now is that most radiologists are using AI. And in fact, the entire liability regime has flipped to the degree that there are debates now to what degree you are negligent if you are not allowing or providing AI augmented diagnostic tools to your radiologist, right? So clearly, radiologists are here to stay, and AI is being implemented in a way that augments and challenges, human judgment, but it certainly does not substitute for it, right? So I think that's a very interesting sort of difference that one needs to make. And therefore, I must say the future work debate on AI is always falling into this trap of not distinguishing between a profession or an occupation and a task, right? And that's certainly key.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so, as you mentioned, this kind of the role of the radiologist, I see kind of Lewis's question online here is like, is governance the last stronghold of mankind? Now, that's a kind of a bold statement. Nothing less is at stake here than the fate of mankind. But it sounds like, as you say, like you're now considered negligent if you don't use AI. So, how does that relate to the kind of human in the loop? And I know AI kind of leads in a way, and then humans kind of validate or double check. But it also seems like regulation is really pushing
Mm.
for the use of AI, whereas I think in the public eye, it's much more like skeptical in a way.
Yeah. So in general, right, oversight is always a topic, and so any AI system must have a certain level of oversight, right? And that is under the AI Act, for example, in the EU, a mandate, and it also comes up in any other major risk management framework like NISC or voluntary codes of conduct like ADA in Canada, the proposal, or in Singapore, Australia. You look wherever, wherever you look, you'll find this. Same with the ISO 42001. So why is that? Of course, is because ultimately it must be a human, and I would agree with the comment. It's not the last bastion of your for humanity. There must always be supervision for AI, and of course that supervision is a function of the risk the AI system poses. If it is simply there to as spam filter for your inbox, it requires very little supervision. If it monitors your credit card transactions, it does require quite a bit more, or your network safety or the like. Or of course, if it does make decisions on, admitting someone to university or inviting someone for an interview for a job, right? So it's always a function of the risk it poses. So for sure, governance must remain in the hands of the human. So that's one. But I think also we have basically two other big bastions where humans will remain, in the lead. Number one is to do the technical design and implementation of AI systems, right? And number two is coming back to the professional service firm, is those that are able to use it to complete certain tasks that require human judgment. So in many ways, it is those that provides technical implementations, though, that are able to do the contextual implementation, including governance, as well as those that use it. And I think what comes across there very clearly is that all of us, right, need to understand enough about this technology to make informed decisions, right? And I think that's also something you're working on, right, in terms of the the human side, as in the skills requirements for organizations that AI brings.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the how we get it done. And then I also spotted the question earlier. I think it was Barry asked like how we think about AI in kind of different senses. And I think that's a brilliant question because that's one of the other really fascinating applications of AI, but also in the implementation. So I did or I'm part of big studies recently about how we can make transformations more successful and generally. And one of the key is like, how can we make them more human? Putting humans at center, which is really counterintuitive in an age of AI and intelligent system, because everyone thinks technology first.
Mm.
And so what we found is like one real key differentiator in making transformation successful is the ability to anticipate when there are turning points, when your transformation is about to veer off course, when leaders have to intervene. And very often we actually drive transformations by looking in the rear view mirror. We look at KPIs. We're basically like a sat nav that tells you like you should have taken the exit back there. But what our research suggests is that if you want to build these kind of lead indicators, we need to pay much more attention to the emotions, the behavioral indicators, the lead indicators of what is about to go wrong. And this is where I'm now on the board of a startup who really try to use AI to think about how can we gain a more complete image of the employee and of the employee well-being. Possibly even create something like synthetic personas to test some of our AI, our transformational interventions, as you will, exactly for AI to help people understand how they feel themselves. Because I'm absolutely true. Some often maybe we're a little bit grumpy, but we're not really sure why. And it may have to do with resistance to the transformation or because your favorite football team lost their Champions League match last night. So I think this kind of multi-sensory data set that we can help with AI is really, really interesting. And it also points to this point that leading AI transformation is still at its very heart a very, very human endeavor. And I think one of the key things I find when speaking to executives is too often still we're doing AI for AI's sake. It's because the others are doing it. We just have to kind of follow the hype. And that's really a problem because number one, there isn't a strong kind of purposeful vision. What's the corporate vision that AI needs to serve? What's the strategic imperative? Because that then also means that the technology is not meaningful for the people who use it. That was a real eye opener for me in this study on transformation that yes, technology matters, but not necessarily in the way that we expect. And it matters in this emotional way because it's the first time that the organization gets to touch this transformed future of the organization.
Yeah.
And in management and leadership, we have this weird habit that we talk about visions as if they're something real. But if we just use different words, if your boss, you as a CEO, as a transformation leader, have a vision, we could also say you have a dream. It's a fantasy until the moment that technology makes it real and the rest of the organization can go, oh, this is what it means for us.
Mm.
But that really only happens when the technology is in service of a clearly articulated corporate vision. And that's where
Right.
I think many, many transformations get it wrong.
Oh, okay, interesting. And would you say, I mean, AI obviously is sort of the technology of our time, right? We often say it's the general purpose technology of our time, and then we debate to what degree is it may or may not be as important as electricity or fire to humanity, as as Sundar Pichai frequently says. But I think an interesting question I get, and to which haven't got a good answer, is AI different from other technologies that have changed, organizations? I mean, look, here we are, talking into a computer, right? Online meetings, Excel, standard office software, the PC. I mean, you can go back in time, the telephone, right?
Mhm.
Is AI different, or is an AI-led or AI-induced transformation? How would you even say it, right?
I think number one, it's obvious, it's a difficult question. And I would say there are some elements that are similar, others are different. What I find really interesting is how organizations and transformation leaders choose one side or the other. And I think you're part of the same conversations that sometimes we have people or we have companies who come in, design courses, and some of them says like, we really want to drive the hype. We need the urgency. You need to emphasize all of those kinds of ways in which AI is different. And there are some. And then there are other organizations which very much emphasizes, no, actually, AI in many, many ways is similar to technologies we've had before. And that's why it's actually useful to learn from history. So often we hear about that the technological developments we see at the moment are unprecedented. It's like, okay, we're in the fourth industrial revolution. That means we've had three others. Maybe there are some lessons we can learn. And so I really find it interesting how organizations choose which side of that equation they're on.
Mm.
But to answer your question more directly, I think in terms of transformation leadership, there are some things that are distinctive. Number one, it is leading a transformation for a technology that is not yet well understood. So everything we know about transformation leadership, project management, clear plans, clear KPIs becomes really, really self-limiting because you don't actually know what kind of value your transformation could generate because the technology you're implementing will have evolved so rapidly by the end point of your transformation that possibly you can't even fully imagine yet what it will do. Number two, I think very often it turns out that AI transformations are not necessarily led top down, but more middle out or bottom up. Because let's be honest, the upper echelons of the organization are often not the digital natives, the ones who've kind of grown up with AI in a very kind of playful way and who can be very imaginative about what it can do for the organization. So the whole kind of sponsor, leader, manager architecture of AI transformations is typically very different. And I think thirdly, we see a lot of ideas where organizations just let 1,000 flowers bloom. Like many organizations I talk to, they don't have kind of the AI project. They have multitudes. And that creates a really, really interesting dynamic and often some either synergy or rivalry between different AI initiatives that kind of make up the overall transformation. And managing those dynamics is something that often we haven't had to do when it came to implementing other technologies.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because I mean I see it more from the technical and from the governance point of view, right? So those would be the questions I get, and I would very much agree. I mean, at the very top of the organization, you need to have someone who's able to make informed decisions about AI, right? And that is first and foremost being able to transcend the hype and see what may or may not add value to the organization. And that comes down to very mundane things, right, from a technical point of view, right? Well, number one is do you have the right question, right, that AI could inform? And if you do you have the data for the AI to make a prediction that adds value, right? Because ultimately, unless you're able to augment a decision by leveraging patterns you've learned from past data or generated data, you're not going to derive any value from it. So understanding the fundamental mechanism, losing the fear of interacting with it, I think is really important. So therefore, I think senior management is, in the fold here in terms of, upskilling themselves or driving the upskilling needed for informed decision making. The two failure modes actually that we see are very much related to this. Number one is the let all flowers blossom, right? And let things fail in the market. That then leads to external failure that, of course, you must avoid, right? Because that leads to these reputational liability and regulatory risks that we are seeing. And of course, with increasing regulations now being enforced, that is no longer a viable strategy, right? I always tell to our MBAs in the machine learning course, right? The Wild West days of AI are over, right? Where you could just use some data, put out a model and see what it does. That no longer works. But equally, the other failure mode also is true, which is where the governance process is insufficient in judging in a timely fashion whether an AI system does or does not pose risks, or whether the risk payoff trade-off is palatable to the organization. And very often, initiatives get held up in the governance process and then don't make it to market, although they are a viable project. So the upskilling also requires a governance process, right? That creates an AI inventory that assesses the risks and then lays out the required regulatory frameworks for that particular AI system, right? So yeah, those two failure modes we would see. So therefore, purely bottom up doesn't work. Purely top down, of course, based on the hype doesn't work, because then people would say, yeah, well, AI is great, but how can it help us here, right? That's basically what you described in terms of the just latching onto that. Yeah.
But as you talk about, leaders having to evolve themselves and to adapt. I mean, just earlier this morning, I was at the Oxford Union, our debating society, which is something we often do in our programs, using Oxford as a learning lab and making the most of the town here. And so one of the questions I got my students to debate was This house believes that leaders without AI expertise are a danger to their organization.
Mm.
So, does
Danger.
everyone at the
That's a
top of the
strong word.
organization now have to be an expert? And does it basically mean, unless you're an AI guru, you shouldn't even think of becoming a senior VP or a senior or a CEO? Or is there hope for the others?
Yeah, so I think the guru, right? I mean, for one, no one is an AI guru, apart from maybe five people, many of whom have been awarded Nobel Prizes for their, work, and that rightfully so. I would not consider myself an AI expert. In fact, anyone who meets an AI expert most likely should expect that they want to sell you something, right? I mean, that's generally sort of the way it goes. I always would say, many people work in AI, myself included, and those that are good generally have more time to experiment with it and learn from it. That's how I would phrase it. But no, I think I wouldn't say a danger too, but certainly a degree of negligence too, right? Because as a senior leader, you would expect, or someone who takes on a senior leadership role, you would expect that person to scan, experiment, and adopt new technologies as and when they become available and applicable, right? In that sense, I think if I were an activist investor and I would see an organization that refuses to engage with an I would certainly be up in arms about it and I would challenge that. Right. So danger, I think, is true. I think there's a good piece of risk management that is involved with AI. So there's certainly also some organizations that rightfully take a cautious approach to AI, especially when they're working in what is in the EU, for example, Annex 3 high-risk areas, right? Including education, right? Or employment. So your startup, of course, will be well aware of, working in such a high-risk setting, which is rightfully so regulated. So in that sense, I think, in the context of the organization's, area that they work in, I think one should expect senior leadership to engage with AI, right? And that means skilling, exploring, as upskilling, themselves and the workforce, exploring and adopting where appropriate.
Mhm.
Maybe just briefly on this, right? So we're debating this. Obviously, we're working a lot with major banks at the moment. And I think what's going to happen there is that with the AI adoption, there are a couple of very obvious things to do, such as providing, co-pilot style LLMs for personal productivity, such as automating many financial decisions like, loan approvals, streamlining mortgage approvals, but also using agents for very basic processes like sort of wealth or KYC, know your customer, right? I think as all banks essentially engage with the same technologies, what will happen is that the entire bar will be lifted for the entire industry. And I think it would be, very hard to not follow suit, right? Unless you'll go out of business. And that's where we come back to the danger or liability aspect, right? If you had a senior leader not willing to engage, clearly they are negligent in terms of looking after what they've been entrusted with, which is the value generation of the enterprise they're leading.
Okay. But then if you say basically the tide lifts all boats, so as banks implement this, it will be a relatively level playing field. How do you reconcile that with all the current hype about, AI as the kind of source of competitive advantage? Because you make it sound it doesn't differentiate between different. So really, where does the magic lie from a
Yeah,
competitive standpoint?
great question. So I don't know, this probably, having seen too many basic classifiers and regression models, right? They all ultimately do the same thing, right? And therefore, automating loan applications processes, right, has some technical challenge on fairness and bias and the like, no question. But ultimately, the method is the same wherever you look. And so therefore, I think for those decisions, it literally is a lifting the bar, as you described, right? So the tide, rises for all. But of course, if you think about what value banks do provide at the upper end in terms of, wealth management or investment banking, there essentially it is human judgment that makes the calls. And I think here really the differentiator will come not from the large language model that powers their platform or model or tools, but in fact from the data which is proprietary and therefore will allow them to make better or more informed decisions about their customers. And in fact, relates back to the example about the law firm, right, that you mentioned earlier, where if you are the holder of that data repository, and in some cases, for hundreds of years, when you've worked as a bank with certain clients or families of clients, right, that puts you in a unique position. And what AI allows you to do is to feed this data into a RAG and then essentially make predictions based on it, and those only you can make. And that I think is where the differentiator will come in, as well as, and this is maybe sort of a spin-off, as you become more efficient, right? Some processes like wealth management, which currently have a certain bar, beyond which it makes it worthwhile for a bank to engage with you. If you're able to automate many of the mundane tasks, you could lower the bar and you can grow your revenue this way. So that's in my mind where I think the delta will come from. On OpEx reduction in terms of the cost of providing basic services, value added to key clients based on proprietary data, and the ability to grow revenue by using AI to make processes more efficient, and therefore growing the scope where these could be employed, deployed in the market. But fascinating, right? I mean, if you look right across the board, there are many great examples of AI adoptions, and you wonder if those that aren't in the press are either keeping quiet about their AI or they're very scared. I don't know.
Yeah, that might be. They are still struggling with that. And I think Joe asked a really interesting question about kind of, AI transformations, given that they're middle up, what do they do on kind of authority, power, influence within relationships? I think that's a really interesting question. And I think one that most organizations don't fully think through before they embark on these journeys. Because in the end, even if you think about AI changing a very, very kind of small cog in the works, as in kind of a small task, it's like we always need to think about how these consequences will grow, and effectively and ultimately to realize the value of AI require you to reorganize in some way. So authority relationships. I mean, if knowledge is power, and access to knowledge is democratized, in whether it's a kind of a proprietary LLM in your organization, and you no longer have to go to the relationship holder, to stay with your example, Matthias, who has been serving this client over decades and holds all the wisdom, but you can get that wisdom from an algorithm. That person will lose a lot of power. We're also starting to think that, of course, coming back to the example of professional service firms, if data scientists suddenly become so important, does it change whether, for example, only client-facing practitioners can be elected partner because they own the revenue? Should there be partners who are data scientists because they have massive impact on the revenue generation potential for the organization? Maybe they even start to hold client relationships at some point. So this is starting to massively tip the scale between what was traditionally considered professionals who held all the prestige, the power, the purse strings in many ways, to people who were traditionally considered kind of back office business services, in the legal world, non-lawyers. They must be the
Non-lawyers, yeah.
only people whose work is defined by what they don't do, but suddenly they really rise to the top. And I asked this question like 5 or 6 years ago to a few managing partners in law firms, like, are you willing to pay your data scientist more than you pay your top earning partner, because they will simply have a larger impact on your bottom line if
Yeah.
you use them well? And they thought that was absolutely ludicrous. I think we're getting pretty close.
Yeah, yeah. And quite frankly, if you look at the data scientists that have the skills that organizations want and need, and if you then compare, the organizations that they are competing with in the labor market, right? I mean, would you go to a law firm or a consulting firm as a data scientist, or would you join, DeepMind or Anthropic, right? And it's clearly if you want to compete for that talent, you have to think about it. And also career progression, right? If you're not able to rise to the top, well, it sort of makes the entire firm, right, less attractive, but by default, right? Because it's very clear that what you do is not core. And therefore, I think you are setting up people in a way that will make them consider, right, whether the pay package is what they're after or whether they really do want progression, intellectual stimulus. Because that's where I must say, look, if I were a data scientist joining a law firm and, doing yet another document recovery, LLM kind of tool,
Yep.
there's nothing new in it, right? That's what I'm saying, right? It's very established methods. Maybe, great news for some law firms that this is now possible, but technically, right, it's a very, very boring project, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's got multiple dimensions. It's progression, it's intellectual stimulus, and it's pay. And I think that really is where the competition sits. But yeah, I was very encouraged actually just to read the questions here, and in terms of what the management responsibility is in terms of upskilling. We seem to certainly have struck a chord with many.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
And I thought that was interesting. Thanks for bringing us back to that topic, because I think we hear a lot about the upskilling and the training, and I think that's really important. But one thing that's recently really struck me, and again, professional service firms are an extreme case, but I think very informative to other corporations as well, is not just the extent to which organizations actively invest in upskilling and training. It's like, do I really want to sign up to this training course? But it's the question to which they allow experimentation and
mm,
playfulness with a new technology. And there, so I've recently had some conversations with people leading AI transformations and PSS, where again, people work very, very closely with a partner or a senior who is kind of a role model. And it turns out that there are even certain kind of technology gender gaps possibly emerging where they say, well, like, you know, men may be kind of more playful with the technology, and especially if they then have a superior who encourages that kind of playfulness, you learn much more quickly because you simply have a go.
mm,
Also, from a leadership perspective, know that typically female executives are scrutinized much, much more stringently in the workplace. So errors are more costly for them. So here it's a question of if they're being playful and things don't work, that might be more costly for female executives, female employees playing with that. And especially if they then have a superior who is also more technologically skeptical,
right.
inadvertently management drives a really, really big divide between different populations in the organization, some of whom are encouraged to upskill by themselves simply by giving it a try, experimenting, failing, and learning fast. Whereas
Mm,
for others, this learning route is less available. And so I think that's really something where leaders need to be much, much more mindful about how they role model the use of that technology, because we can't just leave the upskilling to here is a course you go to. We
mm,
really need to be very, very careful about the climate of experimentation that we create within our organizations.
Interesting. Now I was curious to see. In my space, we would generally talk about so-called sandboxes, where you would allow experimentation within a frame, freedom in a frame, right? Sort of what the way I would generally describe it. It brings, has some ups and downs, right? It by default means it's sort of very small scale and, tightly supervised in that sense, but at least you're free to do things within that sandbox. Is that sort of a good way to go about it? I mean, how would you allow for experimentation, right? Because giving people access to your data and allowing them to meddle with, systems that make decisions on a daily basis, something
Yeah.
to be done cautiously, I would say.
Absolutely, and I would think it's much more. I mean, yes, we all know about the cases where people have indiscriminately used AI outputs and made submissions to courts with precedents that never existed, that were completely hallucinated. So yes, we can't have that. But I think for organizations to be more scrupulous, if you will, in creating those kind of sandboxes, being very clear where you are allowed to safely experiment and where you are not.
Hmm.
I think that's the point. And again, I think there's a problem for the more risk averse organizations who say, you simply can't do this. They're
Yeah.
going to fall behind. But equally, those organizations who say, well, everybody just give it a go, what could possibly go wrong? there's also
Mhm.
a very significant reputational risk. So the truth will be somewhere in the middle. But as is always the case, if you try to strike a balance in the middle, that's much, much more difficult for organizational leaders rather than going all in and on either one of the two extremes.
Yeah. Now, this, of course, leads me on to a question which is totally unfair, but pricing. So, you mentioned the lawyers and the cases. We had the Maha reports that had, hallucinated references. And then, of course, it was Deloitte in Australia, right, recently that had to repay quite a bit of money. So, I mean, in what way would a professional service firm be able to bring AI into their work? Because clearly many things that they do in terms of providing a report can be, dare I say, augmented or at least, accelerated by using these tools. But of course, that also impacts on the pricing, which traditionally has been based on billable hours, right, for most professional service firms. So I'm just curious, if you were to brainstorm, I mean, what's
Well, I think if I had figured out the alternative to the billable hour and how to successfully implement it, I would probably be a very, very wealthy man by now. Because it is obviously this fundamental shift from valuing and pricing inputs to valuing and pricing outputs. And that is one of these big cultural shifts that I mentioned earlier. Like you cannot start by saying, "Oh yeah, we're just making this minor tweak to our operations because this kind of very kind of routine part of our work, this very routine task will now be done by an algorithm." If you're not willing to think through that at the very end, this will mean changing to the pricing model, a change to the KPIs by which you evaluate your star performers, and possibly even a change to your most fundamental governance structure. But that said, if you fully embrace AI and you have a large data set and you know kind of how much value, let's say, certain projects, certain transactions generate, how much they typically cost, we can move to much more data-based pricing. That may not be a flat fee, but you should be able to start valuing the output of your work based on the value you generate for the client rather than the inputs that you have put in. So I would expect in the not too distant future that clients will be more demanding in that sense, not least because many clients prefer predictability of the pricing over the kind of lower prices. So even if you say billables, maybe this might be lower, but we give you a higher flat free price, but you'll at least be guaranteed that this will be the price and we won't be coming asking for more. Many clients will actually value that because it takes away some very painful conversations having to ask for more budget because your professional advisors didn't deliver on spec and on budget as you had asked them to.
Yeah, yeah. One aspect that always comes to mind with pricing, of course, is also you have to justify the delta, right? So if we are now able to access either general LLMs that are trained on open sources like the internet and the like, but also increasingly digital repositories of human writing, like scientific papers and books, then if you think about the delta that a human then has to provide to justify the billable hour, right? It becomes quite difficult, right? So in many ways, the report that Deloitte wrote for Australian government, I'm pretty sure that ChatGPT would have done a pretty decent job, provided the right documents had been provided. So in that sense, what is the delta that justifies you to bill 100 hours on a given project? It will be harder to make, I think. And I'm not sure whether that will play into the labor market also in terms of demand for human labor input into professional service firms. We'll see. On the plus side, though, and I'm not sure what you think about this, but I think it will also democratize a lot of access to these services in the sense that having legal representation, which may have been cost prohibitive in many cases, if you have a law firm that clearly says we are AI augmented, we provide much lower fees because we use AI extensively, and therefore we get the 90% of what you need, but it may not be the 99% that the big firms can do. Certainly, it would allow more people to access legal services and representation.
Yeah, I agree. And I would add to that, of course, being predictive, AI can also help avoid more litigation or legal
Yeah.
cases. So
Awesome.
again, been working with firms to say, look, we use the database that we have to help clients stay out of trouble. In terms of violation of whether it's sustainability rules in supply chains, whether it's gender pay gap. So AI also allows professional advisors to act in a much more preemptive risk management rather than crisis management fashion. And I think that will also be a good outcome for society overall, if we can avoid some of the wrongs before the legal system has to right them.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So what are the big sort of topics that you see in terms of research going forward? Obviously, the space is shifting in the professional services as much as in the field of AI. So just
Yeah.
curious.
Yeah. So for me at the moment, the biggest interest is like, how do we maximize the value from these transformations? I think at the moment there's this idea or illusion that, once you switch on the new tech, the transformation is done. But as we've come back to throughout, and I think a lot of the questions in the chat have really pointed to the kind of the human aspects of this transformation, unless we upskill, unless we create the culture of experimentation, basically, unless anyone uses this and uses this technology in service of a corporate vision and a very clearly defined value, we might be wasting a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy in installing a technology which then simply fails to deliver on its potential. And so right now, I'm really interested on this kind of back end of the transformations. Like, how do we make sure that when we have the technology, when we have AI intelligent systems in the organization, they actually deliver the kind of value that we were aiming for, that was at the basis of the calculation of the budget and the sponsorship, rather than doing something, switching on the technology and say, like, here you go, and assume that simply because the technology exists, simply because you now have this additional icon on your desktop, people will magically use it. That's just not going to happen. And I think that is where a lot of AI projects fail to deliver their value.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how about you? So I'm obviously more interested in the kind of the leadership, the people side. So what's going on then in the AI angle of things? What's keeping you awake at night?
Yeah, so I mean, so actually, Liza also just raised the question about governance. That is what we're working on, right? And that's why we've got the AI ethics regulation and compliance program also launched. And I see quite a few, Nick, for example, and others who are joining on the program. Um, Sound governance is a key enabler, right, to generating lasting value. So we are yet to learn more about how to do this well, and this is an active area, right? And in many ways, we have a good feel for established algorithms like classifiers and how to deal with fairness. We are still learning a lot about LLMs, right, and their behavior. So there's certainly a big gap still, and technology moves faster than we can fill it, right? So that's a key concern. Of course, it's a key concern for those that have to do governance in companies, right, in terms of the risk profile these systems pose. The one area that I am particularly working on at the moment is the regulation of agents. And to get a little bit technical here for a moment, the general perception at the moment is that agents should be regulated in the same way as large language models, right? So if you within the AI Act, this is Article 50 following, which essentially calls them general purpose AI systems. You have SB 43, so 53 in California that deals with frontier models. Essentially, the idea that these models are very powerful, therefore require a specific regulatory regime. I think that is misleading for agents because I think the danger with agents sits elsewhere, right? Not that these models are powerful, which they are, but really we only use them as a translator at the beginning of the agent to just understand what you may want from the agent, right? Because it understands your query. It will go through a chain of thought reasoning to get to an action that it recommends based on your prompt, what we said you would want from it. So that in itself is a very generic task, and I don't think that's specific. What really is the danger with agents is not that these are powerful LLMs at the beginning, but the execution part that follows, meaning that they are autonomous in terms of executing certain things. And that means that human in the loop becomes a human on the loop, and you need governance to actually supervise agents that act autonomously. Now that's challenge number one. So you are no longer involved in each specific, if you're going back to the travel booking, making a booking for your holiday, but you essentially have to supervise all holidays booked by agents for all your employees or all travel, for example. And secondly, of course, what will happen is with Copilot Studio or N8N or Data Robot and all these frameworks that allow you to build agents quickly. We've seen predictions that soon we'll have more AI agents in operation than people on the planet. And that, of course, means that governance, which currently literally is take this AI system through a conformity assessment or risk assessment and fill out forms and collate the data, that will not become possible. So that then brings about the challenge. How can you automate governance? And would you want to, right? And which AI do you trust enough to do governance semi-autonomously, right? So there are many questions on how to set up governance for agents that have a different risk profile. Regulators have yet to tell us how they see agents, and I don't think they should be classified as GPIAs under the AI Act, for example, but in fact they should be regulated based on the context and risk, context in which they implemented and the risk they pose, right? So it should be very case specific. But yeah, how do you deal with this flurry of governance projects that you have to deal with or governance requests? We have yet to work out. So anyway, so that would it keep me up at night? No. Would I give my credit information, card information to any agent? No. But
Okay.
once we solve it, I would probably, and I think they can do a lot for us. They can take away a lot of tasks that people find unfulfilling, right? I don't know if you know Andrew Spicer's book, The Bullshit Job, as a term, right? I think it's a great book. And yeah, what we at the moment we cram many people into offices to do unfulfilling tasks. Those can be taken away by agents, provided we're able to govern them properly. And that's a big big question mark in my mind. But
Okay.
interesting times for sure. But I think I'm more optimistic than pessimistic about agentic for sure.
Okay.
Mm.
On that happy note, I think we're almost at time. There's still loads of questions which we can maybe get to, but maybe at this point we hand it back to our team, or I think have a few more questions for the people on the webinar here, because we want your input in some of our programs that are coming up. So if at this point, can I hand the call to Sai, if you're there, to take over from us? Otherwise, we'll take it up. There you are.
Sure, sure. Thanks a lot, Michael. Thanks a lot, Matthias, for the great session. Yeah, so we are basically launching a new program. So this program is slightly different from the existing programs that we offer at Side Business School. So this program specifically talks about the operationalizing aspect of artificial intelligence that is very specifically catered to individuals who are looking at the practical aspects of things. So this is very specifically designed for senior managers, directors, who are accountable for turning corporate AI visions and ambitions into successful value-creating operating models. So you guys must be having a poll on the screen. So please go ahead and mention the name that you feel would be the best for this specific program.
What we also should do is we should actually have maybe a quick overview and show what programs we currently have, right, while people are voting. And I see the votes being quite even. Implementation certainly, ranks high at the moment. But yeah, I don't know, Bex or Sai, do you have the slide with the programs?
Yeah, sure. Bex, can you help with the same?
It is just loading. It's being a bit slow.
Too many votes floating along the airways.
There we go. Can you see a screen
Yes, we can.
with all the AI programs on?
Yes, we can. If you go into presentation mode, it will be a bit bigger, and then we can just get to the QR code.
Yeah, and just to say, right, that we've built up a portfolio of AI programs at Oxford, much to the credit also of the help of our fellow faculty members in computer science, engineering, and statistics. So we have this fantastic pool of colleagues to work with. And I should also mention the Oxford Internet Institute, right? Philosophy for ethics, colleagues, and of course the Faculty of Law, right, where we have ongoing research, but collaborations. But just to say, so we have a range of programs that if you want to take a look at, the QR code should get you to our overview page here. These could be online or they could be in person. The two I am personally involved in is the AI Ethics Regulation Compliance Program, which is a follow-up program, a 3-week follow-up program to the Oxford Artificial Intelligence Program. That is a 6-week foundational program that gives you the basic knowledge of AI. It's been running the longest of those programs here, and it's had over 10,000 people taking it. So it really helped a lot of people getting to grips with what is AI and what could it do for me. And then the regulation one is on top. You can also have other programs that if you're more interested in marketing, for example, or algorithmic trading, that you could take. We also have in-person programs. The Oxford AI Strategy and Leadership Program is a 1-week on-site program. It's very popular. That brings leaders together and to discuss AI strategic points in the classroom. Not so much the technical aspects, but the strategic aspects for a leadership audience. Or if you want more, there are 2 programs that even award you degrees: the Executive Diploma in AI for Business, which has 4 modules and brings you on site, and where you'll be assessed also on your work. And then I'm pleased to say we're just starting together with computer science a new MSc in AI for Business, which is for part-time people who have got a technical background and want to build their AI expertise. And that builds very much on the modules we are providing for the Executive Diploma in AI, of which Michael teaches one, and for the MSc I will teach, for example, the governance module. So we're both quite heavily involved in those. But take a look. Our team would be very happy to advise you also which one is right for you. It literally goes from the 3 entry-level courses on Coursera to an MSc at Oxford. So certainly we would hope that everything we'd find something of interest. And lastly, just to say, there is a 15% discount I hear from our team being offered. So do make sure that you sign up in good time to make good use of that. Right. With that, I think, Michael, we have come to the time. Any final things we need to mention? I'm looking to the team here. Everyone happy? Right. With that, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure. Well, always a pleasure talking to you. Also a pleasure reading your questions and seeing many names that I've seen in the programs. So it's been great to be here. Thanks for your time. Michael?
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. Thanks, team, for organizing and bringing this conversation together, as we do on so many programs. Really enjoyed the conversation. And when we get the technology and the people working hand in hand, that's when I think something very exciting is going to happen in the future of AI. Thanks for being part of the journey.